Okay, one door down and two to go. I'm going to show you how we're putting our doors together from the door jamb to a solid core door to an operational unit. Well, we're putting our doors together pretty much from scratch, and the reason is about threefold. We have cost, first of all. I want the solid core doors, but they're expensive when you buy those and the frame and the cutout and everything. So we're going to do that by ourselves and save a lot of money. The other thing is I don't have standard walls. These walls actually, normally a 2x4 with two drywall pieces on it, would be 4.5 inches thick, which you get a jamb that's 4 9/16. But you can see that this has an extra wood paneling on it. We did that so we'd have more soundproofing in the bedrooms. And if you look at the next bedroom, there's actually wood paneling on both sides, making that one 6.5 inches and this one 5.5 inches. So I'm going to have to produce my own jambs. The other thing I like about that is they're far more solid and durable than the prefab ones that you buy at the store. Like most projects here at Redgate Farm, everything starts here at the wood pile. We've milled all this lumber and stacked it and dried it. And for these door jambs, I want very dry wood because I don't want any movement because there's only an 1/8 inch reveal around the outside. So if this board warps or twists or anything, it's going to close that gap or possibly open that gap up. And I don't want that to happen. So very dry wood, very flat wood. Looking for nice, clean pieces. Now this is my 10-foot stack here. I only need about 7 feet, but I can cut off the ends. Usually the ends are a little bit checked anyway, so that's okay. I can get the center of the board, which is a lot better. A lot of times I have to go down to the bottom and get the ones that are super flat because there's more compression down there. But once we get this, it's time to head to the barn and start to cut these pieces to length and plane them down. Now, because I took from the 10-foot pile, I can afford to take some of the boards that aren't very good on the end because I'm only using about 82 inches. I generally cut it about 1/2 inch longer than my finished product so that I can make precise cuts later on. But in this case, I've got a long check here, so I'm going to lose it anyway. Let's cut it off here, have a clean edge, and use the rest of the board, which is much better. After I cut these to length, I will then trim them down on a table saw and rip them to 6.5 inches for the jambs, and then one of my doors is actually 5.5 inches. So what I'm trying to do is get rid of as much wood as possible before I head to the planer. The planer blades are expensive, there's a lot of wear and tear, uses a lot of energy, and I'm off grid, so I don't want to plane any more wood than I absolutely have to. You'll notice at the store when you buy the finished product or you purchase door jambs separately that two of the edges are actually rounded and the other side is squared off. Well, the reason they have rounded edges is because those face out. Rounded edges hold paint better. And so I want to do that here also, but I guess I could do it with a router, but I could do it with a hand planer also. It's very easy to do. And this is actually one of my door stops that's going around the outside, and so the door stops and the door jambs will be rounded on one side so that it holds the paint. Once I get those edges hand planed, I just followed it up with a little sander to kind of round those edges off and get rid of some of the straight planer marks that are there. When you buy just a door, it's not a left swing or a right swing. You have to determine that. You can put the hinges and the lock set on any side you want, but you need to lay it out in the room. Now, I'm hanging 3 doors, and all of those doors are actually accessible from the same room. So you're basically going to see all 3 at the same time when you walk into that common room. Because of that, I'm going to set the lock sets all at the same height, which will be 38 inches up. So I'll mark that on the door. In addition, I've got 2 left swing doors and 1 right swing door. Now, if you're not sure what that is, just literally go to the room, put the door up there, and mark the edge of it, and say it's going to swing this way, okay? Now, I'm going to have the hinges, I'm determining to have 3 hinges per door. You could have 4, you could have 2. It's up to you. I'm going to have 3 per door, and you should look at the weight limit of the hinge to determine that. And so I'm going to space them at 8, 38 1/4. You're probably wondering why that is, but it's because of the size of my door and where I decided to put the hinges. And 72 inches. And when I mark this, I mark not only the edge of the hinge location, but I put a small arrow telling me what side of that line the hinge is actually going to sit. The other thing I do is I put an arrow telling me what side the hinge is going to stick out, okay? Because the hinge could come out this way or it could come out that way. So I put an arrow telling me what side the hinge can come out. I then flip the door and mark the location of the lock set. And when you do that, you might want to take it back inside and put it up and make sure it's going to go the right way. Once you route these things out, you can't really unroute them. So you want to make sure that you lay out all 3 doors at the same time so that when you go to cutting, you don't lose track of what you're doing. Now that I've routed out all these hinge locations, it's time to put the hinges on. And you want to be careful when you put these hinges on because you want to make sure they're on the correct way. Now it'll be obvious later when you try to assemble the door and they're on the wrong way, but some things that people don't think about is you want the hinge pins, the top of the hinge pin actually facing the top of the door. That's the bottom, it's on the top of the hinge pin facing the door. And you see how it won't go all the way that way, but it will go all the way that way? So that's the way you want it, because when the door's closed, that's the way it's going to be. Hinge pin up there, it shuts completely that way, and then I'll just mark it and go. And that's it. I'm going to do that with all 3 doors. Take them inside, make sure I put them on the right side. A step that needs to be very precise is transferring the door hinge locations to the door jamb. And the way we do that is we take a scrap piece of wood that's exactly the same length as the door jamb. And I position it such that there's an 8-inch overlap on the end. That's the reveal at the top of the door. Then I screw the hinges into the piece and I pull the hinge pins out. So I have a miniature door jamb. I go over here to my jamb, line it up on the end, and then I score the hinge locations with a knife. And the reason I do it with a knife is because, again, it has to be extremely precise, and a pencil is just too fat. So if I score it with a utility knife, then those locations are exact. And when I put my router on there, I will route out those hinge locations to exactly match the door. To make things easy and very accurate, the Milescraft Corporation makes something called the HingeMate. I think this is HingeMate 150. That's the 350. There's different models. But essentially, it gives you all the router templates for all sorts of hinges and door jambs and deadbolts, anything you want. And they're really easy to use. I come down here to my scored marks and I simply put this right over. This is going to give me the exact spacing that I had on the door if I use the same template. So I'm using the same template. It's going to make sure that that hinge is recessed into the door exactly the same amount as it's recessed into the jamb. And that's going to make sure that the door and the jamb line up together. Now I need to make sure the depth of this cutout is exactly the depth of this hinge. If I make it too deep, the door is going to pinch in the back. If I make it too shallow, it's going to cut down on the reveal on the opposite side. Suffice it to say, it should be as precise as possible. So as I put this plunge router here, and I do that, essentially, I can loosen that up. The router is now sitting on the wood. So what I want is that to be the thickness of the hinge. Screw that in tight. Now, when I plunge route, it will go down and hit the stop, and it will be 1/8 of an inch thick, the same thickness as my hinge. Once I route it out, I want to make sure that that fits in there securely, and it's pretty exact and it's perfectly flush with the wood. So that was a real good cutout. Okay, since that one fits, let's go on to the other two. The last thing I do to check everything is to lay that template back down and make sure that those hinges fall right in the middle of the routed out sections, and they do. There's about a 30 seconds of an inch play, which is good. I can have a little bit of room, but they fit exactly into those pockets, and that means that they should line up exactly with the door. Now that all the routing is done, I can transfer these hinges from my template right into the door jamb. What I'm doing now is I'm dry fitting the jamb into the frame. And the reason I do that is because I don't want to secure this in and realize that it's not wide enough. I can always shim the jamb in. I obviously can't shim it out. So if I need to correct the frame, I need to do it now. This is a scrap from the barn. It's exactly 32 inches long. So if I start from the top here and come down, I want to make sure it fits all the way down to the bottom. And if it doesn't, okay. That means it's 32 inches between this side and this side. A 32-inch door is actually 31 3/4. That gives me 1/8 inch reveal on this side and this side. So now I'm ready to mount the door. Most lock sets will come with a paper template that you can tape directly to the door. And it has center lines and center points for different size locks. Well, I know my size locks and the thickness of my door. So I taped it on there, and now I use a nail punch actually to identify the center of my hole, and then I drill it. Because if you just go to drilling that hole, the drill bit can walk across the wood and you won't get a real accurate placement. So if you punch it first, then that will be directly in the center of your hole. I have two holes I need to put in this door. One is 7/8 of an inch, and that allows the latch to come out this way in the door. It's going to go directly in there. It's going to meet up with the 2 1/8 inch hole that goes this way for the lock set itself. So I'll start with this, and then I'll finish up with the 7/8. Now this part can get a little tricky since I'm working alone, but I want to fully assemble the jamb and the door with the hinge pins in before I lift it into the frame. And the reason I do that is because once it's up there, I may have to shift it around a little bit, use shims on the sides to make sure the reveal on the outside of the door is consistent all the way around. If I were to hang the jamb right now and then the door, then I wouldn't be able to shift it around. Now this is where that barn scrap that I had earlier that's 32 inches long comes in handy, because I want to make sure I have at least 32 inches up there so that the door can fit. Well, the door is up and it fits nicely. Now it's time to take shims and go around the outsides, make sure that it's nice and square. I'm going to level these sides, make sure they're flush with the outside wall there so I can put trim on later. And I'm going to wait to put this hole in the strike plate on until I have it all squared up and secured to the frame and the door handle in to make sure that that latch lines up directly with the hole. Now that all the shims are in and the door is set right, I've drilled this hole, put in the strike plate, and it shuts nicely with a consistent reveal around the outside. The last step is to actually put the stops in. The stops are just what they imply. They stop the door from over-rotating on the hinges. So when it shuts, it will only shut that far. You can't push it any further. The other thing it does is it seals the door, closes off the reveal so you don't have a peeping Tom looking in your bedroom. And if it's an outside door, you put weather stripping on and you keep the cold drafts out. Typically, I set this door and do these last. Don't know if that's right. I'm not a carpenter, but I do it last because I want to make sure the inside of this door is flush all around with the jambs before I put these on. And then once it's shut and secured, I can just literally push these right up against the door and nail them in place. Wanted to show you how I get these excess shims off. Just take a utility blade here and score it on one side and then break it off. And you get a nice clean surface there. Well, that's it. All three doors are up and they're working great from tree to door frame essentially. Now, last thing we have is a trim around the outsides, but I have to head back to the barn and get on the planer and cut some of those pieces. And then Danielle's going to either stain or paint these doors, not sure which. Thanks again for watching this week. Leave a comment, and we'll see you next time.